everyone, and welcome to Inclusive Workplaces with Amara. I'm your host, Dr. Amara, and on this podcast, I focus on sharing strategies and best practices on how to build and lead inclusive workplaces. And today, I have a great episode for you. We're going to be talking about the power of asking questions. And to help us with sharing and understanding the power of asking questions, I have a great and wonderful friend of mine, as well as an ex-colleague who will be sharing some of her insights. I'd like to invite Ingvill to the stage. Ingvill?
Hello.
Hello, Ingvill. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here with you.
I know we've been talking about the power of asking questions just because I absolutely love the way you light up the room with the questions and how you engage with people. And for those of you who do not know, Ingvill, who's we've worked together for over 4 years. I'd like to quickly just give you a brief overview of her bio. Ingvill Frederiksen is an HR and learning development specialist with over 15 years of experience. She's worked both in the private sector and in the humanitarian sector. She specializes in facilitating learning and development programs, especially leadership programs. And she's passionate about building strong, supportive relationships to ensure everyone feels empowered and connected. So welcome, Ingvill, to Inclusive Workplaces with Amara.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How are
I'm
you?
doing good. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's been a little bit since we last worked together, but I really enjoyed over 4.5 years working with you and co-facilitating so many workshops, not just several, hundreds of workshops around the world where we engage with people on different topics. And one thing I really love and still love about you is your ability to take charge of a room through the questions that you ask. And this is why I really wanted to bring you on to just have you share what power lies within good questions and how to actually engage people using really good questions, well, powerful questions. Ingvill, can you just quickly share with me, how did you get to be that way? I've always been fascinated.
I think it connects to maybe how I grew up. I had a dad who was very curious of the world. I have memories of him sitting at the breakfast table speaking Chinese in different kind of language, and he was just very interested in the world. And my mom was very a good listener. When you talked to her, you thought, well, I seem to have very good perspectives. And so she was very interested in human beings. I think I just started asking questions quite early.
That's amazing. And sometimes I feel like kids, when they're trying to, there's a stage where kids are always asking questions and parents can be, please go play or something, and I'm happy to hear that your parents encouraged that. I think that really helps build that level of curiosity that's fostered, by your parents. That's awesome to hear that. And of course, we've been in many different scenarios at work, and when we'd run workshops, whether online or on site. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the barriers that could hinder people or facilitators or even leaders in asking authentic questions. I think there's a difference between just asking questions and then also asking authentic questions that really connect with people. What do you think are some of the barriers?
I think it can be many barriers. I'll bring it back to myself. I think that throughout my life, typical barriers could be that it's so easy to ask the closed questions like, oh, do you feel like this? Or yes and no, or the why is it like that, which can be very interesting questions. But it doesn't necessarily open up a conversation. So being more open in how you ask and curious in how you ask those questions, I think is quite important. And I think sometimes being scared of not knowing, so asking questions and not necessarily, you might have thoughts that I'll show that I don't know, and that's uncomfortable for people. And I think that has been like that for me as well. But I've also over time somehow started using asking questions as a way of comforting myself, meeting new people or networking. It's a way of, at least for me, to kind of somehow find confidence in not knowing. It could also be just overthinking. Thinking like, how will it be perceived? How will people judge me? Or you might not even know what. So I'm asking this question, but I don't know. I don't have control over what's coming. So, and how will I handle it? And that is might be a typical barrier when you facilitate learning, because you are afraid of not handling, because there's a expectation in the room that me as a facilitator, I should know the answer, or I should have the control all the time somehow. How do you see some barriers?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Overthinking, not being very sure. And I think what's really helpful also is bringing that level of humility and vulnerability, right? So understanding, and I think you set that tone from the very beginning when you engage with the audience so that they understand that you may not have all the answers, right? So coming into that space with humility and also being vulnerable, people are more likely to be open. And for those facilitators who are engaging with a particular group or even a leader, having a sense of self-awareness also I think is important. So knowing where you sit with the material, and being courageous and just sharing, I think that's very important. So that mindset, that's the mindset of giving, the mindset of being open and being willing to share, and also going on that unknown journey, because you may not know what answers may come up or what issues may get triggered or whatever. When you lead as a facilitator with a sense of humility and courage, I think you have the power to really build a comforting and a safe space for people to share. Yeah.
I agree. And I think sometimes it can be scary to ask, because there might emotions depending on the workshop and the context and the topic and so on. But I think sometimes people are scared of what emotions might come because of that question. And emotion, many people can feel like, I don't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
And that may play out in how you ask questions, or how willing are you to hold the space in a workshop, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is why I also look at psychological safety and trust, because to get to that place, you kind of have to set the scene. And I just wonder, what are some things that you've done? Or what do you think are a great way to really create that safety where people can share, and also to help people understand, or to kind of set expectations? What would you say about that?
Well, there's many ways of doing that, and something that you have done very often is that you put emphasis on setting ground rules, setting kind of the frames for how should this workshop flow. What are the boundaries of how we handle and manage different perspectives or opinions? How do we kind of allow that space, or the learning space, to really flow through? And I think you have really put some extra emphasis on, and I agree with that. I think that an opportunity to set some frames that the group aligns around. So there's a group expectation that this is the playground, and it's an opportunity to hold people to account. If those agreed ground rules are not met, it's an opportunity to say, hey, where are we at? And I think that's quite important. So that's one way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one time we had a conversation, and you said something like, well, if you're going to start a workshop or facilitate a workshop, it's not a given that you'll be able to land that psychological safety, right? Especially if you're maybe the line manager, or you're the leader, and you have to have this conversation, and maybe you don't have the buy-in, or people are still very skeptical about your intentions. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that. Obviously, we know that you don't just get psychological safety just because you say, okay, now I want you to feel safe. Just saying it doesn't necessarily mean that people will feel it. So what are your thoughts around what can help facilitate that space where people really do feel safe when they come in, whether you're leading a meeting or having a difficult talk or facilitating a session?
Well, I think in my own experience, starting with myself is quite important. And so typically before a workshop, I would check in with myself. I would actually have a conversation. Where am I at? How do I feel today? What might be stressors? Can I park those somewhere? How will I hold space for a variation of conversations? And that might mean checking in with just breathing and making sure that I feel grounded and that I'm present. So that's about checking in with myself. But then, go in.
I want to just jump in there because you talked about checking in with yourself. And I think that's really important because as facilitators or people in general, we are energy. And if you feel unsettled, right? When you feel unsettled or you're not sure, not confident, it totally shows. Even if you think you have your game face on, somehow people are able to pick that, right? So I think it's really, so I think it's really important, like you said, to check in and make sure you have the right energy, you have the right mindset, whether it's your breathing or just taking it in and preparing mentally. I think that's really powerful. I just wanted to highlight the importance of that because people can smell your confidence or lack thereof if you're not careful.
Yeah, and so I think that is something that I do. But then I think that as a facilitator, there's a lot of, or a leader, and there's expectations that somehow you are in control. And if you want something to happen, you have to role model it. That's something we are taught and learn all the time, that if you want certain behavior to move, you need to have that kind of behavior yourself. And to me, typically in a workshop or as a leader, it's about holding space and asking questions and really listen, being curious, being interested, and show the group that it's okay to have different opinions. It's okay to share emotion. It's okay to voice disagreement. And I think it's quite important to ask questions as a way of opening up the space. And there's plenty of ways.
I want us to, really dig a bit deeper. I absolutely agree with you. Just setting expectations extremely important. And not only that, I think it's also very important for the facilitator or whoever is leading to be very clear about their intent. And I think if you want people to be vulnerable, which is what you really want, right? You want people to not be, because the greatest thing or barrier for people is fear, right? Fear of speaking up and sounding stupid, or the fear of making a mistake, the fear of maybe saying something that people might want to retaliate later on. These are all the things that run through people's minds when they're trying to speak up in a meeting or in a workshop. And so being able to create the space would mean you being vulnerable, like you said. So you leading with vulnerability and also stating your intent authentically, so that people are not, you're not saying one thing and then reacting. I like what you said there about the questions, being open. If you are maybe not so open to certain kinds of answers, people will tell. They'll figure it out, right? So if you ask a question and you feel like maybe the way you respond to that question is a bit harsh or not exactly open, or you're not asking to dig in a bit more, like, tell me more, people will just lock up. So I just want to buttress that statement about, being open through your questioning and being authentic, so to speak.
And I think it's about being genuinely interested. Okay, so what lies behind that? And I think we've had workshops together where there's been what on the surface looks like a disagreement or different perspectives.
Yeah.
But by asking more, so what does that mean, or do you have examples, or what does that look like in your
Yeah.
context, and asking the same from both sides, sometimes it shows that they were having actually not so different opinions, or they might find common ground, or there's some common value, but there might be reasoning behind the way things are. In communication, sometimes we just read the top line, that might look like disagreement, but when you start digging, that's when you realize actually we're not that different, or these two opinions does not differ so much. Or it's okay that it differs. We can respect each other in any case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's extremely important to just even bring that out from the beginning to these points you mentioned. And even and I think we do that also when we start at the beginning of a workshop, where we say, okay, listen, we may have differing opinions, but we will decide to be respectful of the different opinions and ask follow-up questions. I like what you said in our preparation, where you talked about tell me more, right? So using that sentence, tell me more, doing what Judith Glacier calls double clicking. So when we are double clicking, we're able to get more information, because sometimes someone might say something or respond in such a way that you're thinking, what do you talk like? What do you mean? What do you? Yeah. So and what happens is when you lead that way, of course, people get a bit shy, and then they retreat. And so when things are not clear, as a facilitator, it's important to ask those questions, to dig a bit deeper, to understand. Right. Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, because it's a group learning setting typically, or even you lead a meeting, we have such expectations that we have to be professional and to the point, yada yada yada. And that is true. It might also mean that as someone who are a participant, don't want to take the space, feel like I'm taking too much space, I don't want to take the space, I'm hearing too much of my voice. But then to me, what's really important is to actually show the group we want to hear more, because that's where the richness of the conversation really comes out. To just be, at least in a learning setting, we really want rich, vulnerable, good conversations, because that's where we can have new insights. And it's not for a facilitator to bring that to the table. It's a co-creation, and co-creation is something you feel very passionate about, and I agree. But to do that, we have to allow talking space. And as a facilitator, I believe that's asking questions is really a key tool.
Yeah, and that's kind of what sets it. That's what actually makes it happen. And in order for people to feel okay with taking up that space, I think it has to be communicated not only by words, but also by the posture that you come with as a facilitator. Yeah. So let's talk about challenges and meltdowns, right? Because let's be honest. As facilitators, or even as a leader, you may start a meeting or a conversation, a discussion, a strategy meeting, and you're going for one thing, for one goal or objective or two even. And then something happens, the conversation gets derailed, or there's a big chaotic response, and then everyone is just, have you ever been in such a situation? Because I have a story. Have you ever been in a situation like that?
I mean, yeah, but let's hear your story and let's see if I can remember any.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. I can share this one. When I was back at university, finishing my doctoral work, and I was teaching a course. This was back in Germany. On this particular day, I started a conversation about this was during the Syrian crisis, where a lot of refugees were coming into Germany, and then we're talking about the role of the society and the right way of being German. There's a particular German word now, and I completely forget. But it talked about the certain way of being German, and this word just created such a chaotic response. And literally, I had two factions in the lecture room, and people were just going back and forth, and I was just like, oh my gosh, how did we get here? And I just had to calm the room and settle everyone and just, say, okay, well, thank you so much for the feedback. But right now we have to move on. We have to move to the next topic. But I feel like in that moment, I felt I could have done it a better job of one preparing around that topic. This was a political topic, and I just asked the question without knowing that would be so have such an emotional response, and I literally lost control of that class for maybe 2-3 minutes, and I had to come back. So I mean, sometimes as a facilitator, if you're not very prepared about, or if you don't really know a topic very well, and you kind of venture into that topic as a way of adding some more topics or an idea, that could totally backfire. And then if you haven't done the work in terms of setting the rules or the norms, that can be very difficult. Another thing is people forget. Like, so even if there's a group norm and we say, okay, guys, we're not going to talk over each other and we're going to, listen, people still forget. So sometimes it's also about reinforcing when things just go awry. Just make sure that there's a way of bringing everyone in. And I remember one particular guy was saying, okay, it's time to calm down. So that's like one I kind of, I messed up there. But yeah, it happens. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, it's not a specific thing that stands out where everything kind of went out. But I remember there was a training where we worked together in the humanitarian sector. And with that, it also means that the people where we create learning workshops, they work in context that can be really, really hard. Hard professionally, hard personally. You have to deal with people fleeing and their stories.
Yeah.
And I remember that we had managed to create the psychological safety. People were sharing. It came across that the person was comfortable enough to actually share quite a vulnerable, emotional. I remember specifically at the moment, I was thinking, oh, okay, so we're going there. And then I was thinking, how can I allow space for that to happen, allow space for that person, and allow space for the group, and make sure that the group hold the space for that person. And a way of using questions connected to such a place is to ask, how do they feel? What are they comfortable with? Are they okay? What do they need? And then also for a group setting, are there people with similar experiences? Or can we bring the group together? Because sometimes how the group handles vulnerability just brings the group stronger together, more connected. And to me, I find that holding that space and asking questions as a way of holding that space can be very helpful in terms of bringing that human connection, bringing learning, and continue that space where people connect after a workshop. Because I think that is also important, that we connect, we come together, we learn, we dig deep, but then what happens after? And I think if you manage at times together, people are connected after. And I think that's beautiful.
Absolutely agree with you. There's so many different ways things can deteriorate if you're not an experienced facilitator. And even if you are an experienced facilitator, you just never know what person is listening, what histories or backgrounds people have, and how that question or the experience in the room could trigger someone. And I'm wondering, what are some, of course, we know it's important to create group norms. And I'm just wondering, what are some other ways in which facilitators and people who lead spaces can better prepare and also manage when things just go awry?
I think it's possible to think through what might be important questions to ask. And you can think that beforehand. It can be strategic. It can be strategic questions, but it can also be about how are we handling this current situation? How do we feel about it? How do we, it's sometimes about bringing a meta perspective, because it might mean we are not so deep into things. And I think that, to me, is a way of, you can prep some something is about your own grounding, and the other is, okay, so how will I facilitate this? What does it look like? What's the entry point? What's the main body? What's the closure? What are some of the most important questions I can ask to really get through the way I want to? I don't know if that's where you were going, but yeah, that was what came up in my mind, at least.
No, I absolutely agree, and I also think that maybe sometimes taking a break.
Yeah, for
right.
Sure.
Sometimes calling at a time of, but I like the fact that doing that pre-work, I think, is extremely important. So maybe before you run the workshop or the session or what have you, it might be important to imagine what potential questions could come up, and then based on the content that you're putting together, you as an individual, you should have at least some answers, or at least imagine that if this were to be asked and XYZ, like, how do I respond? And I think that could be another way to mitigate that, should that come up. And that should be part of the practice or the preparation. One is, of course, make sure you create that group norm to kind of help get everyone, aligned. And two is take a break. Sometimes things are going crazy, like, okay, let's take 5 or let's take 10 and just chill. You might need that. And also 3 is, what you're mentioning about the questions. Imagine what potential questions could come up, and then prepare answers so that you're not caught unawares, right? That's something I could have potentially done in my class. Shoaib Nouri, hello, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. He says, great discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So these are the 3 things that we need to think about. And as we wrap up the podcast for today, I'm wondering, Ingvill, what would you share as a top 3 must-dos as a facilitator when it comes to asking questions and leading a session? What should we remember or take away from today?
For me, it's about being very, very present in what's going on. Being in what's going on here and now, and really listen, be curious, what's without judgment. And to me, that can be hard sometimes, because you might have judgment. But I think it's really, really important that you're curious on what lies behind, and how can I bring that into the space in a meaningful way that brings learning to people. So that's one. I don't know if I have typically, do you have one?
Well, I think we talked about authenticity and being vulnerable yourself, right? So I think it's important as a facilitator, if you want people to feel open, vulnerable, sharing, then you should be willing to go there yourself, right? You have to, I like the word you used there about co-creation. People should feel that they're co-creating the experience with you as a facilitator, not that you're the all-knowing person who's coming to tell them all the answers. That doesn't really work. And so when you lead with vulnerability and you yourself role model the kind of sharing that you want people to share in the group, that definitely makes a huge difference. So I like that you mentioned that at the beginning, which was about being authentic, listening, digging deeper, like asking a question. Wow, that was a very interesting point you raised there. Tell me more. Yeah.
But I think it's really important, because sometimes I've met people who've been really curious about who I am and ask, what do I do? And it really makes me warm and fuzzy, because they are making me feel very special and unique. And as a human being, that's a beautiful feeling. And I think to me that's quite important, that it's a power to allow people to feel that what they have to say actually matters, and it's valuable. And I think that is really key.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you said there, because to be honest, everybody wants to be seen in the workplace. People want to be seen, even if they're hiding or are shy or don't want to speak up. They really want to feel like they belong. And I think what you said there is really critical. When we are engaging, we need to ensure that we are creating that space where people, through your questions and through your curiosity, that people are feeling like, wow, their ideas really count. I think that was really beautiful how you put that together. I don't know if there are any other things we want to share, last minute thoughts before we round up for the day. Any idea? Yeah.
I think for me, and bringing it back to the context we operate in the world. And I think, to me, human connections is really essential in all we do. And being curious and asking questions without judgment to people, which is very hard, is quite important. And I think it's a skill set that needs to just be developed in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ingvill, for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights and perspectives and stories. Gosh, I've really enjoyed this exchange.
Me too. I really enjoyed
I
it.
really enjoyed it, and I really felt like you led with a lot of authenticity, and I'm sure people will see you, and I'm hopeful that people who are also listening, that they do take something out of this podcast and use it. If there's any one thing that people should take out of this, it's to lead with intent and to be really, and not only that, to lead with curiosity. I think that's really powerful, because when we do that, we get to humanize spaces. And I think that's really important. Just even in the workplace, just humanizing the workplace, because we long connection. This is just the reality, right, of humans. So thank you so much for sharing. Ingvill, how can people reach out to you? If people want to ask you more questions or connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure I will be part of some kind of post, and then so people should just feel free to reach out and connect.
Fantastic.
I would love that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ingvill, and to everyone who's watching this either now or watching in the replay. Please feel free to ask questions and share your comments in the comments, whether it's on YouTube or on LinkedIn. It's been a pleasure running and sharing and facilitating this discussion. Until next time, be well and see you. Thanks, Ingvill. Goodbye.
Bye.